Hey there, it's Olivia-Savannah here from Olivia's Catastrophe, and at the moment it's my favourite time of year because everyone is putting out their best and worst videos. And I'm here to give you my worst reads of 2020. I have 10 books here that I found either very disappointing or just to be really troublesome books, and I'm going to tell you about them. These are in no particular order, but when we get to the last three I'll draw your attention to them because those are the three that I really disliked the most this year. I'm also only counting books that I finished. I'm not sure if I DNF'd this year any books, but if you'd like to hear about the books I have DNF'd, you should go to my Let's Talk DNFs video. But for the time being, let's get down to these books. The first book that I want to talk about is The Priory of the Orange Tree by Samantha Shannon, and this one just felt very boring and dry to me, and it went on for way too long. It's about a matriarchy where there is a queen who needs to have her next heir, and there's also dragons involved and a bit of a quest, and I don't really know how else to summarize it, but I was really looking forward to an epic high fantasy with a matriarchy system, and I felt like the matriarchy was not quite a matriarchy. I could definitely see the influence of us living in a patriarchy affecting how this matriarchy worked. I would have wanted it to just be more female centric, and while I did enjoy the FF romance, I felt like it just didn't really fit that well into the story. The story dragged for me, the pacing was incredibly off, so while the world building was incredibly detailed, it was just not enough to make a good story for me, and as well as that, characters were just not pulling me in. I was very disappointed in this because it was on my 5-star prediction list and then it ended up being a 2-star. A lot of these books I've unhauled, but there's a few that I still have, and the next one I want to talk about is The Space Between Worlds by Micaiah. I didn't have too many expectations going into this book, but it did sound so cool, so I thought it was going to be so cool. This one is about a girl who lives in a world where the ability to travel between worlds exists, and in every single world there is a duplicate of yourself, and you can only travel to the world where your duplicate is dead. And our main character, Kara, is dead in all worlds except 8 of them, and the story kind of goes from there, but it just did not work for me. I felt like the writing was very dry, the plot was just far too convenient against everything just happened way too conveniently for our character, and I feel like even the rules of the universe were broken for this character to succeed in what they needed to do. While the world building was interesting, all of the characters felt very flat and 2D, and it just didn't come alive for me. We had some good representation in here, we've got some non-binary side characters, we've got a bisexual black main character, but it just did not fall into place with me, and unfortunately this was a very disappointing read. The next one I have to talk about is The Curious Incident of the Dog in the Night Time by Mark Haddon. When I read this one I was just so disappointed because it was marketed as the greatest autism rep book, and it's not by an autistic author. The author claims it's not autistic rep, and the representation is not even that good in my opinion. So we follow this main character who finds out that their neighbour's dog has been murdered in the nighttime, and he wants to find out who has done it. It felt very predictable to me. I was able to predict who had done it, but that's not the main part of the story. It kind of goes from there, and it's more about character development. Unfortunately, I feel like this book tries to paint some characters in a positive light that it should not have done, and I don't think you can excuse some of the awful things these characters do or have done to make them seem in the positive light that they are at the end. Can't really talk about it in too much detail because of spoilers, but if you want to know spoilers and which characters I think were bad or why I thought they were bad, just let me know in the comments and I can tell you. After that, the next book I want to talk about is The Catcher in the Rye by JD Salinger. So this is a classic that follows this young teenage age boy, young adult I guess because he's at university, and he's kind of just going through life and he's just wondering about life, wondering about the point of things, and that's kind of it. I can't really remember anything else significant happening in this book. He was just kind of wandering around, not doing too much. I really didn't like our main character. I just could not connect with him. I wouldn't like him if I knew him in real life. I thought he was really mean, and I just don't know. I really didn't like the main character. The writing style didn't grab me, and the themes that it touched upon didn't grab me. So overall I was mostly bored by this one and just didn't like the character. After that, the next book I have to talk about is As I Lay Dying by William Faulkner, and this is the one that I had to read for class. I had quite a few books that I had to read for class this year that I just didn't get along with, but I decided to kind of stick it to the main one and the one I disliked the most, and that was this one. As I Lay Dying has 15 points of view, and we're following this family whose mother has just passed away, and they are bringing the mother to where she wants to be buried, and we follow them along that journey, all their different points of views and the points of views of the characters that they come across. And to me, I just got lost in these 15 characters. It was far too many points of view to follow. The writing style is incredibly frustrating in this book. It's very abstract while being quite down to earth at the same time in certain places of the novel, and I don't think it worked. I don't think it gelled well, and I didn't like any of the characters again. They were all incredibly unlikable, purposefully so. I could understand it was purposefully so, and yet it still just did not work for me. The ending was incredibly unsatisfying, and I wouldn't really recommend that book. After that, I want to talk about Airhead Runway by Meg Cabot. So in April, I did 30 books in 30 days, and part of the plan of doing 30 books in 30 days was revisiting some of my childhood favourites and also finishing off some series I started in my childhood and seeing if the ending was any good that I never got to. So Airhead Runaway is the third book in the Airhead series, and in the Airhead series, what happens is there's a teenage girl who goes to meet this model that she really likes, and a TV screen falls on the model's head and kind of makes her brain dead, but her body is still there. And meanwhile, for the girl who's going to visit her, body dies but her brain is still alive, and a surgery is performed where her brain is put into the model, and she's told she just needs to live the life of the model and just continue living life that way. So that's the beginning of the series, and this is the third one, and quite a few things have happened since then, and I did read some recaps, so I kind of knew everything up until the point of this third book, but phew, I did not enjoy this. I felt like it was so juvenile, but it also had a lot of fat phobia. It also had a lot of sexism. The way that she talks about herself and how she values beauty while saying that she doesn't value beauty above all else really didn't gel with me. I feel like she had a lot of double standards. The romance just seems so off, and it's just one of those books that I really should have left in my childhood. Speaking of books that I should have left in my childhood, the next one I have to talk about is actually a series, and it's the Falling Fast series by Sophie McKenzie. Again, in the same vein, in the 30 books in 30 days. I reread the first 3 books in this series and then read the last one, which I'd never gotten around to, and I'm just putting all of them on this list, even though rereads shouldn't quite count, because they were so awful. How did I turn out to be what I would like to call a functioning and decent adult while having grew up on books like that? Because it was just so problematic. We have River, who is our main character, and she falls in love with Flynn at this acting thing that they do where they're acting out Romeo and Juliet. I know, Shakespeare. The love for it extends into my childhood. And Flynn has anger issues and an anger management problem, but he's not really getting the care for that he needs. He's quite poor as well, and it's just kind of Flynn going through his problems and River trying to love him despite the difficulties that this romance poses. It had a lot of problems. She kept calling herself fat even though we know that she's not actually a plus size character, and the way she talked about herself and her appearance was disappointing and saddening to read about, but also made me quite frustrated sometimes. Flynn is a character who has severe anger management issues, and I feel like all of the adults in this book totally fail him, and it was so horrific seeing the way that the mum did nothing. River's parents kind of didn't do enough when it came to managing River, who was running away, who was acting out. The teachers didn't do enough for Flynn either. It was just made me very angry as an adult reading about how all of these adults completely failed these 2 children. They made very immature romance decisions and choices. The books quickly became repetitive with the same issues coming up. All the books started in the same place, ended in the same place, and then it repeated, and then by the last book the plot went completely off the rails, went in a completely dodged direction, and then the epilogue was just awful. I don't see what the point was. I just did not like this series. I would not recommend it to any teenagers. I can't believe I read that when I was younger and thought it was very good. My memories of that were, what a good series, and now it's just, what a dumpster fire. And now we're down to the last 3 books, and these 3 books were the ones I disliked the most out of all the books I've read this year. So the first one I want to talk about, oh, these are not in any particular order, they're just very low, very low. So the first one I want to talk about is The Last Battle by C.S. Lewis, and this is the final book in the Narnia Chronicles. there's a prequel, but that depends on where you read it. And yeah, it's basically the last book. And I just was not happy with this series by the time I got there, because along the way there were some traces of racism, and I was, you know, classics, you kind of look the other way sometimes. Not that it's not problematic, but you accept that it was a product of its time. But I feel like this is a series that we uphold as children's classics, and we read them to children pretty often, but the problems are just too glaring for me to see past them. In the last book, we have characters doing blackface, we have an ape as the villain, so it's kind of a bit racist, the stereotypes in the past of, you know, an ape and a monkey. Well, we still have it today, like an ape and a monkey pertaining to a black person, and the ape like wearing human clothes. It was just a big stereotype, didn't sit well with me. I didn't like that. I didn't like the blackface. I didn't like how I can't even remember what they were called anymore, but I think they called them like darkies. The villains were called darkies, which was incredibly glaringly racist. They have another name, but eventually it just was abbreviated to the darkies, and yeah, I was not happy with that. And then at the end there's a character who I really liked, who I felt like was did a little bit dirty in terms of gender roles and such. I know it also has some other female characters which they do much better, but that still didn't sit right with me, so I didn't really like it. I didn't like the ending. It just made me unhappy. The whole last book made me incredibly unhappy, and I feel like the racism is a glaring problem that I cannot read past when it gets to that one. After that, we have It by Stephen King, and I haven't done my December wrap-up where I talk about my problems with this book in more detail, so I'm just going to give it to you all here and explain to you the reasons why I didn't like It by Stephen King. So this is a book which is a horror that follows these children in Derry, and there's this killer clown that's going around and killing all of these children. And my main problems with this can be split into three, and the first one is not an issue of personal preference, it's an issue with the narrative structure. So this book is set in the past when they're children, but it's also set in the future when they're adults, and it goes between those two timelines. However, I will say that 85% of the book is them as children and 15% of the book is them as adults. This does not work because the killer clown is killing children while they are children, right? So the suspense is, are these children going to be able to defeat this clown and live, or die like the rest of the children? However, all of that suspense that should be there if it was told in chronological order is eradicated and killed by the fact that we go towards them as adults and we know exactly who survives, who doesn't survive, which is a really big problem when the suspense is supposed to be that these children could be killed trying to defeat this clown. Narrative structure wise, it doesn't work. You kill all suspense in your book, and for a book that is 1,166 pages, you need that suspense. Otherwise your book is going to be boring. So I felt the narrative structure was completely off. Then we have to talk about the female representation, which was it was awful. We have one female character in this friendship group, and she is sexualized to the nth degree. She's got a father who is quite pedophilic and also an abusive man. Then we've got in the future, her husband is exactly the same. So she goes from one abusive relationship to another abusive relationship. Because this is also supposed to be a coming-of-age novel, all of the guys are very aware of the fact that she's a girl. I can accept that in a coming-of-age novel, but the way, like, boobs are mentioned, you know, if Beverly crosses her arms, she crosses her arms across her boobs, whereas if, for example, I don't know, what's another character? Bill crosses his arms, he just crosses his arms across his body. Like, somebody needs to buy Stephen King some breasts, because he really is so aware of them throughout his book. It got ridiculous. And then even as adults, they were just always thinking so sexually about female characters that I couldn't take it. And there is a really weird scene at the end. If you've read this book, you know the weird scene that I'm talking about, and that's where I absolutely lost it. There was no way of redeeming this book for me in any which way or form. I mean, it was already at that point far gone, but that female representation there absolutely was disgusting to me. Also, children? Really? I also was looking forward to a climax that was good, that was great, and the book, even though it's got this clown that's killing children, was quite realistic. I feel it was quite grounded in our realistic world, but it opened up into something a bit more supernatural. I felt like it was more magical realism feeling, and then it opened into deepening into that supernatural fantasy element, and I didn't quite like that shift. I felt like the shift came way too late for it to really feed in well to the story. And also this book, I switched to audiobook by the end of reading it because I felt like it was going on for too long, and I felt like it reached the perfect place to end, and then another chapter started. And then it reached the perfect place to end, and then another chapter started. He just would not stop writing. It just went on and on and on. It was too long. The representation of females were bad. I can talk about the black representation. I didn't like that either. I could talk about the fat character. I didn't like that representation either, but I'll spare you the nitty-gritty details. Maybe I'll talk about those aspects of the book more in my December wrap-up, but you can tell that I didn't like this book at all, and I won't be reading any more Stephen King after that, which you'll already know if you've watched my anti-TBR tag. And then last but not least, there's a book that I really didn't like, and I hated it, and it was awful, and it was the worst thing ever. However, I kind of knew before I started it that's where it would end up. I didn't expect to like this one. I didn't expect to love it. However, I had a really fun video idea and I really wanted to do it, and that was a book battle between Twilight and 50 Shades of Grey. It was a lot of fun working towards making that video, and it was a lot of fun filming that video. It's not one of my most popular videos, so I don't know if I'll do a book battle again. However, the book I'm talking about is 50 Shades of Grey by E.L. James. This is a romance book. It's a BDSM romance between Anna, who is this average girl, and Christian Grey, who is this millionaire who's into BDSM. I don't know what you want me to say about this book for all the reasons why I didn't like it. All the reasons you've ever heard about why this book is bad, those reasons are completely valid. It's a very abusive relationship that you get in this book. It's just so problematic. Every angle that you look at it from, it's a problem. We've also got horrible... Anna is just not a strong character whatsoever. She often doesn't do what she wants to do. She kind of just does whatever Christian wants, and she keeps pursuing this romance even though there's big problems with it. I thought the writing was awful. It was so bad. It was just so bad. It's very rare that I think the writing itself is just bad, because I can often tell like authors put effort into their works. I don't really want to critique their writing that much, but this one, it just was not written well at all. The sentences were quite juvenile in its writing style, and there was all of this inner goddess thing and all of this referring to her medulla oblongata, and it was just utterly ridiculous. All of the things, it was a mess. I don't really have much more to say. And there you have it. Those are the top 10 worst books that I read this year. I'm sorry if I talked about any of your favorite books, and I will be back very soon with a favorites video, which I'm even more excited to film and talk about, because talking about my favorites is one of my favorite things to do. Please let me know in the comment section down below, what was your worst read of the year, or have you read any of these books? Do you agree or disagree? Please give this video... Oh, and I wanted to say that it's also always okay if you just want to leave an emoji down below in the comments. I never really mention it in my video, but some people do that and I love to see it. It just like shows that you were here, but you don't have the mentality or the motivation to comment on, can't think of anything to say. Please give this video a thumbs up if you enjoyed it. Hit the subscribe button if you want to see more, and don't forget to hit that notification bell to be updated every time I have a new video. And you know what they say, onwards and upwards. Excelsior!